Kenya's biggest conversation gets into the second hour. We thank you very much for tuning in this morning. We always love it. Always love it when you are tuned in from wherever you are around the country. Where was that in the Caribbean?
Grenada.
The Grenada. Yeah, it's now about 6 minutes after midnight. Good morning. Now we can actually say good morning to him, right? City, today's proverb.
A baby cannot be heard crying in their mother's womb.
A baby cannot be heard crying in the mother's womb. The baby can only be felt kicking.
Be specific. A baby
in their mother's
can
womb.
only be felt kicking by their mother.
Not only, anybody else who puts their hand on the tummy can also feel it.
Yeah, we're getting granular on this one, aren't we?
So let's be sure.
City.
Also depending on how old the pregnancy is.
Yeah.
Eric,
Yeah?
we don't have to force people to be vaccinated.
Uncle, you've just decided
No, because,
like that.
man, the thing has gone on to kicking babies and you putting your hand where so the baby can... Hey!
A child's heartbeat can be heard while in their mother's womb.
Yeah.
No argument there. Okay, Sawa. We've made peace, City.
You know, at this rate...
Where is this proverb from?
You know what it's going to tell me? That the baby can actually see what's going on in the mother's womb. Now, this one, brother, it's an African proverb.
It's an African one.
Yes, it is.
It's Africa-wide.
It's Africa-wide.
Okay. So let's talk about the HPV vaccine for young adults or children. And our guest this time is the chairperson of the County First Ladies Association, Maria Mbeneka. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you, Eric.
Good to have you. We call that the hot seat, but because we are talking about, matters of public interest, this is not going to be the hot seat for you. It's just going to be warm.
I'm feeling warm already.
Sufficiently warm, right?
Yes.
County First Ladies Association. I'm assuming that this represents the first ladies of the counties.
Yes, it does.
Of course, then minus some like Kirinyaga, Kitui, Nairobi, Machakos now. So 43 members?
Yes. Right up. Yeah, around that.
Okay.
So we're looking to actually amend our constitution in our upcoming AGM.
There's a constitution?
We have a constitution, yeah.
Okay, go on.
As an organization, and we have to consider the fact that we have female governors now, and so we have to embrace, a more suitable name, which would be County First Spouses Association. And I would like to say the first spouse of Kirinyaga County is also an active member of our association. So it wouldn't be right for us to keep insisting on First Ladies Association. Of course, when it was formed, that was the situation in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Kirinyaga is well represented as well in the association. So we only now have Kitui, Nairobi.
Kitui we reached out to Kitui County in 2017. And they sent a representative, Governor Ngilu sent a representative from her county.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eric mentioned the beginning of our show, of this segment, that you are a lawyer.
Yes, I am.
Now, ignore the smirk on my face, but I really have to ask this question. Does the two-third gender rule apply?
In this association?
Yes.
No, this is really dictated by the elections. So if we had more female governors, that would be quite interesting. We'd have a better balance, I guess, at the association. So this is really, it came about because
it's a baby of what happens in the election.
Yes.
But you can nominate to meet the threshold.
Well, no.
Ex-official first ladies or first gentlemen of counties.
So what happens is that the governors will send a name of who is going to represent the county in that situation.
Okay.
Yes.
You were in the news recently because as the First Ladies Association, you had a meeting in, was it Kajiado?
Yes. We were in Kajiado to launch the Empower Cancer Clinic. The County First Ladies Association has, in partnership with the Africa Cancer Foundation, which is headed by Mama Kisumu, as we fondly call her, Her Excellency Dorothy Nyong'o, Women for Cancer, International Cancer Institute, and Roche, together with the County First Ladies Association, came together in 2018 so that we could come up with a program that was going to deal with this issue of cancer, especially breast and cervical cancer. Because looking at the numbers then, it is true that there's actually a pandemic. It's a crisis in this country, and it was understated for a very long time. More so now that there's COVID. COVID has, overshadowed a lot of diseases and NCDs, which we call non-communicable diseases. So we thought, how best should we go about this? Because by the time we're discussing treatment of cancer, in many cases it's too late. So we thought about having awareness, advocacy, screening, and of course in partnership with the Beyond Zero initiative, which was started earlier in 2014 or 2015. Screening is really a critical factor. And when you think about cervical cancer, it's a preventable disease. So we came together and launched, now we're talking about 9 clinics. Kajiado was our 9th clinic. And we expect to launch our 10th clinic in Bomet next month. So we've done Kisumu, we've done Meru, Bungoma. After Bungoma, we went to Taita Taveta, and then Makueni County, Laikipia County, Marsabit County, Kakamega, and Kajiado. Yeah, so our intention is to ensure that at least in each of the counties, we have an Empower Cancer Clinic, which basically talks about, which we are looking at screening. We're looking about nutrition. We're also talking about treatment, because in these clinics you'll find we have the chemotherapy chairs, so that at least 2 chairs in each clinic, but with time and resources we'll be able to expand. Yeah.
There are health organizations, there are research organizations that have been working in this field for the longest time.
Absolutely.
Conducting research on HPV and so forth. Now, there are also community-based groups and groups that work with the less advantaged communities who have also been in this space. Now, but there's one particular aspect of cervical cancer that is talked about but not loudly enough. The contribution of sexual activity at a very young age, and I'm talking about girls, young girls,
and boys.
Yes, but I mentioned girls because they seem often to be at the wrong end of this particular stick. When you are messaging and when you are going about managing this with this very wholesome approach that you have, is there a component that deals with this aspect? So that, because this is a preventative aspect to it, is there a strong enough arm of, a body of experts who have seen it fit to craft, alongside what you're doing, messages that ensure that young people are actually informed about this, and so that they know? Without a shadow of a doubt, what research has shown conclusively, if you look at communities where they have child marriages, these are also communities where you have very high rates of cervical cancer, again, in women.
That's true. And CT, what you'll know, and I'm sure you know this, all of you, is that it's not easy to just narrow down to one organization, because if you look at HPV, for example, it's related to cancer, it's related to HIV.
It is.
It's related to teenage pregnancy, early marriage.
Yes, it is.
So this is a constant conversation that we have to have with our children. If you remember, I think it was in the 90s, when the conversation about education on HIV in schools, remember, in the curriculum being introduced in schools,
I remember,
there was a strong opposition, starting with the church, right? And of course, that influenced the parents. And it took a really long time for us to actually accept, because now it became, we are dying. It's a crisis. So that you move beyond the crisis, you move beyond the stigma, and so on and so forth, for it to actually be discussed in schools. This is now, so when we're having that conversation in the curriculum in schools, what is it that is preventing us from actually getting into the reality of the matter that kids are still having sex? And if we're talking about introducing the vaccine at the age of 9, as early as 9 years, that tells you that by the time this kid is, actually the science shows that by the time the child, or especially the girl, is 15, the likelihood that the HPV vaccine will be effective is minimized. Up to the age of 26, you can take up to, I think, 3 doses. But if you catch it earlier, it's bound to be more effective. So there's a concurrent conversation to be had. You have to really join the dots and have a conversation around sexual activity. Where there's sexual activity or exposure, is it safe? Because by the time we are pulling the trigger on a vaccine, it means there are no condoms involved here, right? So there's such a convoluted way we approach it, in my view, as a country, that we really need to address and grab by the bullhorn. Because when we are having conversations about HIV, even in the workplace, where is it obvious that there's a policy around, the office, that people need to be safe? Yet people work together, office romance bloom, people talk about their biggest fear being pregnancy. Yet, by the time you get to pregnancy, you've been exposed to HPV, you've been exposed to STDs, other STDs, and HIV. So there's something that we're not doing right, and this is actually just confronting the issue head on with our young people.
I've often said that is it.
Yeah,
that we want to shroud it in all kinds of political correctness or some kind of moral, cultural clothing.
Yeah.
Whereas we're dealing with a monster that we're not going to be able to handle if we don't just, rip the Band-Aid off and say, this is what we are dealing with. Because in as much as several sectors would like to say different things, the church is going to say, and they have said very clearly, some sections of the church have said very clearly, look, we know that those who have been sexually active at a younger age, and those who then have, especially girls, and then girls who have then gotten pregnant at a younger age, then are more susceptible to contracting cervical cancer.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, what they're saying is that once you give this vaccine, what you're basically doing is that you have given a cover to every young girl and boy to go ahead and be sexually active because they know that there is protection against this disease, which is now the problem that they have with this. It's not looking at the physiological aspect of this at all, whether in fact it is actually protecting these young people from getting this cancer later on in life. So that's that. That's also there's the matter of age, that they don't feel as though you should then subject people at this age to this kind of medication. It should not be the case. But just the same way they said you should not be encouraging young people to use condoms. But we see messages, we see research that came out last year that I shared even here, that girls under the age of 17 are the highest consumers of emergency contraception between Saturday and Monday every week in this country.
Absolutely.
So whether you want to call it moral, whether you want to call it cultural, the fact of the matter is that young people are out there and they are highly sexually active. That is what we ought to deal with. So how then must we deal with it today? There's the cultural, there's the moral, there's the religious. But there's the fact that they are exposed to this danger.
First is to accept that unprotected sex is happening, and it's happening at a very early age. You have younger kids getting pregnant. You've seen the numbers. Every time there's KCPE going to be sat, how many kids are covered? I mean, and those are the ones who are barely, the ones who the media houses get to see. If you look at the reaction we had in 2020, when we were finally confronted with the fact that we had to stay with our kids at home, everybody suddenly realized that girls are pregnant and it's a crisis. But it has been there. So was it the absence of education or the absence of a discussion between the parents and the children? So first and foremost, let parents take their first responsibility, which is to have a discussion with their children. I'll give you an analogy. In Kenya today, if you get into a vehicle and not wear your seatbelt, people will look at you funny. if you get into a room today, if I walked in here today and lit up a cigarette, what would happen to me? I'd be kicked out. No? Not in the studio?
Kicked out?
Yeah.
No.
For smoking indoors?
That's mild.
Kicking out is what is mild.
Oh, kicking out. Okay, fine. I'd probably be thrown out the window. Yeah, but how was it in the 80s?
Lights up
normal.
anywhere.
You know, in the car, in the matatu, in the, you know,
In a plane.
in a plane. Do you want sitting? I mean, do you want smoking or non-smoking?
Yeah.
So it really is about what we choose to accept as a society. Let us first accept our own responsibility as parents, because I'm not going to send my child to you as a teacher and expect you to teach my child everything. Your role is limited to the hours that you spend with this child in school. So no matter the type of sex education that you're going to offer in school, if that child goes home and the first thing that they're confronted with is exposure to pornography, exposure to, you know, sex happening around them by young people, you know, the parents are not there, they're not being policed. So you have to have these conversations with their kids at home. And we have to understand that these kids today, as opposed to us when we were younger, have these mobile phones. They can learn anything and everything, in fact, probably more than we know about sex and about experimenting and all that. So I think also the shock messaging that we were exposed to. I don't know if you guys watched those videos as kids, as young teens, about STDs, and they'd show you very graphic images. And
The two of you do understand the question is being directed at the two of you.
I was saying there were no TVs when you were growing up?
No,
or
it's black and white. Okay. Sex.
Yes.
The thing was not even discussed when we were young. As for graphic pictures, those are things you confronted and were assaulted by when you're an adult. As a child, these are things you really didn't encounter. But remember that we're talking about a mindset that manifests itself in how you handle it. But the real problem is that that mindset didn't really go away.
It didn't.
It tapered slightly. But our children are not very different from us because of the way we've brought them up. And moral values and leanings that we have are more or less the same leanings that our children are likely to have. And we forget that a lot of what we knew was based on an absence of knowledge. So because we don't fill that gap, our children now fill the gap for themselves.
Yeah. So there's excess information.
They have, and the boundaries aren't set because we ourselves are very ambiguous about boundaries. So the children more or less set up boundaries for themselves.
So the society is evolving.
It has evolved seriously.
You know, the whole conversation that we're having is around sexual and reproductive health rights.
Yes.
And we always, we keep saying, you know, we need to confront this, we need to discuss it. But as we all say these things that we need to confront it, we need to discuss it, we actually don't practice it. At the back of the mind is, when we say we, I mean you.
It's other people.
I don't mean me. I don't mean that I need to confront it. I am a father. I am not discussing this saying, you know, in fact, it's really true.
You're
like,
not? Why?
We need to do this to confront this thing. Something at the back of the mind.
It doesn't affect you.
No, not that. It's just something at the back of the mind tells me, but you know, am I really, really, really willing to confront this?
Are you ready to have a
Am I
conversation
really,
with your
really,
teenage
really-
daughter
yes.
who is in this bracket right now?
Yeah.
Right
To what
now,
extent?
About with these issues. And but then maybe the questions that we ought to be asking ourselves is that, are you then ready to then have the conversation when the consequences are staring you in the face, wishing that you had this conversation, you know? And I think it's with everything. It was with COVID that it never really is real until it is at your doorstep.
Correct.
You know, COVID was something that was affecting people out there.
Yep.
Until
Other
your
people.
Right. Until your sister, brother, mother, father
Yourself.
was infected or contracted the virus, and then, God forbid, passed away. And then COVID is real. And for a lot of people who were practicing today and say, okay, well, you know, I have an 11-year-old daughter, I have a 12-year-old daughter. I'll have this conversation when it's necessary. Until your 11-year-old daughter shows up on your doorstep pregnant, God forbid, even then showing signs and symptoms of this cancer later on in life.
Yeah.
It is at that point that we will start to have the conversation, and I'm saying it's very late.
But even at that point, because, you know, all those things that you're saying happen today, there's somebody who will be confronting their child who is now pregnant.
Yes.
Today.
Yes.
But the conversation that's going to happen is not the conversation that you're thinking will happen. It will be a conversation of, now these are the consequences. What happened?
It's a blame. It will
it's
be a blame
game. And there's no point where this
And it's the mother who is blamed.
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely.
And the mother blaming the daughter. I did not bring you up this way, because they believe that they have done the best they could to bring up this child. The conversation is not going to be introspection. What did I do wrong? Maybe I should have had that conversation. Or now that I'm listening to Maria Mbeneka on SpiceFM, actually it's true. With the other younger children, I'm going to do things differently. No.
But you know, the problem, I think, and also an issue, is that there are very many competing issues at the same time.
That's true.
There's the economic issue, there's this upbringing. And for a lot of people, this upbringing is not these conversations. The upbringing is, did I find you a good school? Did I pay your school fees? Did I make sure that you had shelter over your head and food on the table 3 times a day? That's upbringing.
And remember,
I did it, right?
If you can't give what you don't have.
Right.
So if your mother never had that conversation with her mother, or even the education to be able to understand what this is and what it could look like, she's not likely to have that conversation with you. So there's it's like Siti said, it's the generational gap. We didn't really change. That mindset didn't really go away. The way we were brought up is the way we invariably end up bringing up our own kids. And that has to change.
And at that age, when you're in that age of teenage and then early adult, you're actually looking at your parents and wondering, why can't you just give me information? I mean, I want information. You become an adult. You become a parent. You do not want to. No.
When you become a parent, you actually become your parent.
You become your parent.
Or if you really try, you become your grandparent.
So this whole we need to find a way. Either it's forced, just like you said. What is it? When you talked about walking in here and not being able to light up a cigarette, it's because it was forced as well.
Yeah.
There's a law in place that says smoking in public is prohibited. There's a law that says selling cigarettes in such and such a place is prohibited. Advertising cigarettes is prohibited. We've got to force it. If we just allow it to be, conversational,
there is the law.
This is the difficult thing to do.
Eric, there is the law, and I'll tell you as a lawyer, the laws, we don't have an absence of laws in Kenya. It is about ourselves accepting to observe those laws. We have a law that is banning FGM, has criminalized FGM. Has it stopped? It hasn't. We have a law that has criminalized poaching. It may have reduced, but it hasn't stopped. I mean, we have all manner of laws, even against theft. But every day, what do you wake up to?
Corruption, for crying out loud.
6 billion daily. So we have to accept, as a country and as a society, to actually live within the law and observe the law. When it comes to these moral and social issues, there has to be acceptance across the board. That's why when we're talking about early marriages, now we've changed tact. Certainly, like Kipia, we're talking to the wazes, where this is prevalent. Because now it looks like when we're talking to the women and the girls, there was a critical partner we had left out. And you may have all these plans to eliminate and eradicate HPV. But if you don't have consent of the parents, if you don't have information reaching the parents and the children, then we're not going to do it.
I'll get granular on this one. It isn't so much parent. The patrilineal nature of our society, if you don't have what we call buy-in from the men, that thing is not going to go very far.
That's true.
So this conversation has to include men just as much as it includes the mothers and the young people. Those so-called heads of families, they honestly have to be not just included in the discussion.
They should be the pioneers of this many discussions.
We should seek to understand, because a lot of the pushback we get has to do with what they understand you to be saying or what they misunderstand you to be saying. So if you don't understand this and you don't get their perspective and point of view, whatever you're spearheading or whatever you're putting in place is going to beat headwinds.
That's true.
That's
Understand their concerns.
Yes.
Address those concerns, and
Yes.
that's why I have an issue with the FGM bill. Remember we discussed
Yes,
it here,
we
the
discussed
FGM
it.
law. It's got to be holistic. It can't just be one way. Come and cut. Wait, no.
Did
that
you
was
just
the
say
wrong
come
pun.
and cut?
That was the wrong pun. Pun not intended at all.
My friend, that one.
Wow.
Pun not intended at all.
Hey.
Wow.
Mariam Mbeneka is the First Lady of Laikipia County. She's also the chairperson of the County First Ladies Association. We are talking about cervical cancer jabs for schoolgirls. And this, we're talking about the ages of, 9 to 10? 9 to 11? Starting from as young as 9, getting the cervical cancer jab.
Yeah.
Is this something that's being accepted by the society? Do parents understand the HPV vaccine?
Yes and no. If you look at data coming out of the counties, you will have an uptake of the first dose, because there are 2 doses, in Bungoma County of 52,000. 52,000. As opposed to Mandera, where you have 10. Of course, you have to look at context of population.
Yeah.
But that just tells you about, the information, how is it percolating. So in Bungoma, for example, you can look at certain factors. How many NGOs, how many CBOs, how many CHVs, are going out and talking and engaging with the communities. How many people are accessing a facility where they go to, for even an annual checkup, for example. So go back to screening, which is what we've been doing with the Empower clinics, where we encourage the mothers to come in for screening, where we encourage the mothers, like in Laikipia, to ensure that they go for the ANC clinic and then have the baby in a facility. What happens when you come for the ANC clinics is that you get information. What happens when you come for the annual screening, not because you're sick, but because it's the thing that you do every year, then you get information. Where you have the community health volunteers going out into the community and engaging with the communities and having conversations beyond drinking clean water, then you have a more informed, community. Now, there are many of us will tell you that the uptake has been more successful when the kids are at home as opposed to when the kids are in school. Why? Because when you go to school, you'll be told that by the teachers and the schools, which is also now another area that we're discovering there's a gap, you need consent from the parents.
From the parent.
So when you go home, you have you have time with the parents to discuss these things. So during the COVID period, somehow people were able to, in some areas, vaccinate more, because then there was a bigger push to have this conversation with the parents. Now, if you go to Mandera or other areas where it's a vast area, there are competing issues like drought. They are pastoralists, so they are not centralized in one place, and many other ASAL areas are like that. When will these people come to a facility? When will a mobile hospital reach them? Because it might decide to come to your area today, but you've moved because you've gone to look for grazing elsewhere. Yeah. And so in those areas, then you'll find the opposite, that where the kids are in boarding school, you may be able to get a higher acceptance, because then they will accept that in the school, that they're making the right decision. So even by the time you think about getting consent or having these conversations, you will be dealing with a situation where you're already vaccinating because the kids are in one place. So there are competing interests here when you look at the counties and approaches. But where we've seen higher numbers, for example, in Bungoma, where you have 52, Kakamega 44,000. Nakuru is also doing well with about 30,000. Nairobi is terrible because the uptake is at 19,000. And if you consider the urban population in Nairobi.
Have you interrogated why it is?
So this is for me, my biggest concern here is that people don't seem to know That's my biggest issue
That's
here.
what I was asking, whether parents are aware
Yeah.
of the HPV vaccine.
And this was, the fact that it's actually in the national rollout vaccine calendar or program, meaning when you have your measles, your chickenpox, and all these, at some point, when your girl is between 9 and 11,
You
they
should
should
Come
be
up on the schedule.
exactly.
Yes.
So it doesn't seem to have reached the public, because this was launched in October of 2019, where we had decided now as a country we cannot keep losing women. 9 women every day in Kenya were dying.
I can see the problem where this could be.
Yeah.
Because if we're talking 2019 and that's when it was rolled out,
Yes.
a lot of the girls who are getting to the age 9, 10 have already been in 7 to 8 years of their vaccine schedule.
Yes.
So on the initial schedule, because when you have your baby or whatever, you're given that card.
The card, yes.
And you have the schedule and you know when each vaccine should come.
Yes.
7 years ago, this HPV was not there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So by the time 2019, a lot of the girls who would have been getting it at that time had been through these 7 years of not having it on the schedule. So
Yeah.
maybe there were some boosters that were given at the age of 5.
Absolutely.
You have another one coming up later. It was not there. So that would mean there would have to be a national communication about, okay, it was not on your schedule. Then we need to now have it there. Because you're likely to remember that this one is coming up if it's on the schedule. But
Yeah.
time had lapsed.
Yeah.
A long time had already passed.
A place like Nairobi, some of the big towns, have very huge advantages. Huh? It's a collaborative advantage in that if you look at the early years of research into HPV, they were actually done in Nairobi, the initial studies that were being done in places like Korogosho. Now, so it isn't as though you don't have a body of people who are informed, you do. But anytime you're dealing with something as serious as cervical cancer or any other disease, the only way you tackle it is a multi-pronged approach. It can't be we're going to do this, meaning you have to have an understanding with the Ministry of Education. I mean ministry, okay? Because you're talking about young children. You also have to have an understanding with all these NGOs that are proliferated right across this great city of ours and who do this work. Because the people you want to reach, they already reach these people. They already talk to these people. These people already know them.
Yeah.
That little inclusion of that particular segment is something that they can do a lot easier than anybody who's just coming up. Then there's the Ministry of Health that oversees some of the medical interventions that, again, you find in some of the big towns. In the absence of this collaborative approach to dealing with this matter, we are going to be discussing this thing even next year and the year after that. Because
You're
it
right.
isn't as though it cannot be managed. It can.
You're right, because as we speak, we give the vitamin A
Yes.
in
Polio.
schools. We give the boosters
Polio
for
boosters.
measles
Yeah.
and polio
Yeah.
in schools. So the intervention and it goes back to the conversation about sexual reproductive health is different as opposed to tunampatia booster ya minyo.
Yeah.
Those ones they will agree.
It's okay. Sawa, hiyo ni dawa.
Yeah, but when it
Ni
comes to sexual
ugonjwa.
reproductive
See,
health,
this is not a disease, ugonjwa.
yes, and remember, cervical cancer doesn't manifest,
Immediately.
obviously.
Even when it does manifest, it
Yeah.
doesn't have those huge symptoms.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's a silent killer.
Yeah.
And by the time a woman is dying of cervical cancer, she can even die in her 80s and 90s, but she's lived with this disease for over 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Somehow, it just goes unnoticed because of the simple issue of screening. When we had the Cervical Cancer Awareness Month, we were able to screen about 150 women just in Nanyuki town. Out of those 150, we had 35 showing positive for some lesions. Now, the issue is to investigate whether the lesions are cancerous, potentially cancerous, or not. So how many women will just get out of their house and go for screening?
Voluntarily. Just like, today is the day I want to go and get screened.
Exactly. And this is something that you need to do from the age of 21 years as a young lady
Yeah.
throughout your life.
It's all about information. And it starts with, the same way we were discussing earlier,
Yeah.
it starts with the community.
Yeah.
If as a community, we first of all, have a problem dealing with anything that has to do with sex in any way, whether it's in whatever manner, if we are not ready to do that, then we are not also ready to start inculcating that information with our young girls and young boys, so that they grow up knowing that, for example, when I get to this age, I need to start going for screening and this and the other, and destigmatizing the whole experience. Because even today, how many adult women who are aware of screening actually go for screening?
Correct.
How many go for the pap smear? And they'll say, my friend told me, and no. This is about, I think we have to work a lot harder than we are doing. But also we have got to understand that context of why are we so uncomfortable about this, and how can we go around messaging this so that it's not just about sex. It's about life. It's about living, our livelihoods. It's about everything. It's about our health. So it's not just sexual and reproductive rights. It's about health.
And when you teach young people to accept or just about their bodies, just understanding their own bodies and taking responsibility for their own bodies, then you'll start to see a change. If you get on a motorbike today without wearing a helmet, you know that potentially if you crash, you're going to crack your skull.
Yeah.
But you wear the helmet because you want to prevent that. It's the same conversation you have to have with our kids. Because by the time you're discussing exposure to HPV, you're going to be talking about sex. So that then you have a choice. Because at one point, this child will be confronted with whether or not to have sex. And God forbid, if they get to the point where they're having underage sex, how will they do it? Because that's the conversation that nobody wants to have.
Yeah.
How do we get past the uncomfortability of the whole thing? And then also, even in these messaging that we are giving, because I'm looking at it now, going from county to county, having these centers set up where screening can take place, where vaccinations can take place, getting people to come means that they're comfortable with the process.
Yes.
By the time they're going to come and get screened, by the time they're going to come and get a vaccination, they've understood the importance, they're now comfortable to have the conversation and then take action after that. And then telling the truth and be honest about what really happens. I remember, cousins who would tell me that their mothers told them when they hit puberty, now if you look at a boy you get pregnant, and they actually really believed it. That you hit puberty, you look at a boy like this, you get pregnant.
Yeah.
We're not talking about falsehoods now.
And
These
you're
are actually things.
And you're saying that information was false.
Talking about knowledge, a man, So how then do we get to the place? I mean, and what are some of the things that you're doing, around counties to say, even spreading up, giving the right information?
Yeah.
Because honestly, Maria, some of the things that young girls are told is it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree, and it's about the messenger. Because if you go to a church that is preaching fire and brimstone and you will all go to hell, are you likely to go back?
Yes.
Well, that's another conversation. But when you're talking to young people, the approach has to be their approach. You have to have people who speak their language. So meaning that we have to expose young trainers, which we've done, by the way. If you look at the HIV, there are youth centers in many, many counties. And those that are active are run by young people. And the conversations that they're having are open and frank, and it's relatable.
Yeah.
So if you're having a conversation with someone who looks like you, who talks like you, who understands you, who doesn't judge you, then the information is likely to percolate. That's what we are doing in many counties. Not enough, in my view. I think we are only reaching the urban youth as opposed to the rural youth, because when you go to the rural areas and the farther to reach from the main centers, then the conversation is different.
Consider, Madam First Lady,
Yeah,
all these communities, no matter how far-flung, have conversations.
that's true.
Now, the mechanism by which they have this conversation is the mechanism we must latch this conversation to. For instance, if you want to talk about sex, it has to be in a forum that people are comfortable in. So you ask yourself, for instance, you talked about young people. Where do men meet? Where do they congregate? Forget when they're having a drink. What else do they do? What groupings do they what chamas? All these places will have influencers and people who are opinion shapers and opinion leaders.
Yeah.
Now, in such a forum, a discussion such as this one would be a lot easier to accept because, as I said, they're in familiar surroundings, but it must be had. The communal way in which we did things and which we keep thinking about worked because our societal construct was the village setup and everybody was in the village. We still have that construct, but it's different. So it's a question of the village that this person belongs to. That's the village you go and talk to and you bring about this message. At that level, they'll understand it because they're among people who they feel, one, they want to be acceptable towards and people with whom they are comfortable. But if it's just general education, all the misgivings that we have on this particular subject will come to the fore and act as a barrier. Because one of the things that messaging, I think, takes for granted and assumes, in my opinion, wrongly, is that the people you're talking to didn't have a way in which they went about this business. They do. And what you don't know, but what you are doing is telling them that what you're telling them is better than what they have.
Yeah.
So it'll be a passive-aggressive approach to you. They will not tell you no. But they are most certainly not going to do anything you tell them.
They feel insulted.
Yes.
I mean, are you assuming that I didn't know this?
I didn't know this. What I talk about.
Even if you
You're assuming that now my way of doing things is not as good, is backward, and you are bringing in this mind-a-little thing of
You are
yours.
discussing sex with me and I have 3 wives and 14 children.
Yes.
Oh, where do you think these children came from?
What are you telling me? But then consider also, CT,
Yes.
where does the pushback for this conversation come from? It comes from various quarters, and not just
Yes.
one. It comes from religious leaders, it comes from the elders, it comes from men, it comes from women, it comes from the children themselves in some certain ways because of the way they've been socialized. How do we find a way of addressing all this pushback in the context of the people who are pushing back?
Let me just give an example of what I have seen done and I've participated in doing. When I worked in the field of HIV and AIDS, this was a serious problem in the western part of the country. It was decimating entire communities. And we realized the opinion leaders who are listened to probably the most were church leaders. So one of the things we did was we got in our employment somebody who was an ordained reverend. Somebody who could talk to church leaders and whom they could listen to because he was one of them. And the problem we're dealing with then was discordant couples. It was a landmine. It was a complete landmine. Yes. But the moment this matter got to the point where it was in the pulpits, it's suddenly becoming easier and easier and easier. And then within the conglomeration of those church leaders, these discussions would take place. So once you have that level of leadership talking openly about it, believe me, a lot of the hard lifting or the heavy lifting is already done. It becomes easier for that conversation to be had. Because imagine this is somebody who didn't have that particular opening, and then a member of the congregation comes to them with that problem. How do you think they're going to handle it?
They don't know how to.
Usually they don't. And this is the assumption that when someone is a religious leader, they ought to have an answer to every problem you have. They may have the same problem as you, and they're looking for an answer. Then you've gone to them with a problem.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, certainly with a simple thing like screening, you would think that it's easy to call people, mobilize, say, come for screening. But they will come there because screening, what comes with screening is other services such as immunization. You check your blood pressure, you check your height, your weight. But when it comes to the actual screening, people take off. Why? Because, one, there's a cultural issue, which is the same issue that was affecting mothers opting to deliver at home as opposed to the facility. If you belong to a certain culture where it is a taboo for you to be exposed to another man other than your husband, you are not going to go to that facility. You're not going to be screened. You are not going to deliver your baby because there's a male doctor or a male nurse. So you have to really think about it in a granular way, like Siti is saying, that by the time we go for our mobile screening, somewhere in Laikipia North, a place in Kondani called Ilmotiok, I will have to get in and get screened and come out, and the women will say, atayame amefanya.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
In many of these communities, they have traditional birth attendants.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
If a health facility includes such people who are already accepted by the community.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Even if it is community circumcisers.
Yes.
If you include them in your program, you actually find that whatever you are putting across becomes infinitely more successful because, again,
Absolutely.
they are relating to people they know and they trust.
I agree with you. And that's how actually we overcame our problem with maternal deaths in Laikipia. We actually saw these traditional birth attendants as companions. We actually call them TBCs now in Laikipia. And we incentivize them because we tell them for every mother who delivers at the facility that you bring, every mother you bring, we will give you a goat. Because they are paid by the community
Yes.
with a goat.
For the service.
Yes. And we realized that we were actually interfering with a very fine process here and sidelining the TBAs.
Yeah.
And now the turnaround is amazing.
Madam First Lady, just imagine members of the community who had been delivered by traditional birth attendants.
Yes.
And you're telling them, these people,
They
they look at you and
come
what
to
is
a
this?
young
Yeah.
doctor.
Yeah.
Who you don't
come
know.
to a young
They will
doctor,
not
some
accept.
stranger,
They will
and
not
leave
accept.
this one.
Yeah.
Who delivered your brother?
Yes, yes.
And even in the West, they're actually favoring home births.
Yep.
Yeah, you have doulas and
Doulas.
such now who are,
Doulas is just another TBC.
They're doulas.
Yeah. But they're trained, of course. The level of training is a bit higher.
But this is really the point.
Yeah.
When you have community workers,
Yes.
why can't you upscale their capacities? Because you can't. These people already have knowledge. Just add it to the knowledge they have
I agree with you
Yes.
100%.
and make them an integral part of what it is that you're doing.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
This UHC dream that we've been having. One day,
We're getting there.
one day in this country, we shall
but
have,
sure.
slowly but surely,
Yeah.
one day.
But
we shall
Eric,
have
allow
UHC.
me to talk about the deaths
Yeah.
that are associated with cervical cancer. And this is the thing about the push to have the vaccine. If we can prevent it, and because the science shows that it's preventable, let's do it. Because what we end up doing is fighting something that has already reached the end. By the time we're talking about 9 deaths a day in 2019, 2018, how many years are those? And these are women who are dying at the age of 40,
Yeah.
35, 50. And yet we could have dealt with it at the age of 9, 10, 11 years. So that's really the conversation that we ought to have as a country that we don't have even in many other sectors. Prevention. Prevention is really critical here.
Very, very, very true. And City keeps saying this now you have the stamp of the First Lady's office. Go forth, City. Spread the message. Maria Mbeneka, First Lady, Laikipia County, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You didn't call her Her Excellency.
It doesn't
You were
have to.
going round, Madam First Lady.
I wasn't going around, Eric. I was juggling what to call her. Because
Madam First Lady,
I'm certainly,
Your Honor.
I wasn't going to call her Maria Filgona. Okay? Sorry, Mbeneka. I wasn't going to call her that. So, I was... When you saw me looking up, I was saying, now, how do I dress the First Lady? But Your Excellency, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, City. I've had so much fun here today.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.